Today I am bringing you the monthly recommendations video for January, and this month is fantasy reads. As I said last month, I tried not to include any fantasy because I wanted to put them in this video, and I have a bunch around me for the recommendations. And if you didn't know, the monthly recommendations group was created by Trina and Kayla Rain, and there'll be a link to the Goodreads group in the description. But I have a lot of books to get through, so let's get started. First up, we have middle grade fantasy. I've got them in sections. So middle grade fantasy is first, and we have the Keys to the Kingdom series, which I did mention in my last video, but I'm not ashamed of mentioning it again because it is just so good, especially for like the fantastical elements. It follows a young boy who is kind of forced into becoming the heir to the universe, and there is magic, and there is this house that is the epicenter of the universe, and in there so much magic happens. It's just so fun. Then we have the obvious ones. We have Harry Potter. It's kind of middle grade. Some people would call it YA, but I think of it as middle grade. There's Harry Potter. I'm not going to give a plot synopsis. Harry Potter. Also not going to give a plot synopsis for Percy Jackson. Middle grade fantasy. Greek mythology retellings. Beautiful. Then we have the Magnus Chase and the Gods of Asgard series by Rick Riordan. This follows a young boy who discovers he's a son of a Norse god, and it's really funny. So, whistle stop tour on that one. And then we have the Kane Chronicles by Rick Riordan. This follows two magicians who become hosts to Egyptian gods, and they're trying to stop this snake thing from doing bad things. Really good series. And then the last middle grade series I'm going to talk about is the Magisterium series by Cassandra Clare and Holly Black. Yes, this is not the first book. This is the second book, The Copper Gauntlet. And the reason I recommend this is because so many people compare it to Harry Potter, and it really irks me because, yes, it's about a young boy who goes to a magical school, but that is the only thing they have in common. Like, seriously, these books are so funny, the characters are so complex, and they're so young for this complexity. I just adore this series. The next book comes out in September, and I'm so not ready, but so excited, because this series, it's got so much magic. I love it. Moving on to some YA fantasy. I think we'll alternate between YA traditional fantasy and then YA urban fantasy. So with the traditional fantasy, I'm going to go with The Inheritance Cycle by Christopher Paolini. And this book came out in like 2003 apparently. And I read it in probably 2005-ish, just before the film came out. And it follows a young boy who discovers a dragon egg, and it hatches for him, and there's basically a world where dragons are so rare, there's really only one other dragon, which is held by the evil ruler, and the series follows the protagonist, Eragon, trying to take down the Dark Ruler. And it's just so good. Like, I plan on rereading this series this year because I thoroughly enjoyed it the first time round, but I want to look at it with a new eye, but I definitely do still recommend it because dragons. Now we'll go to our urban fantasy, and we're going to go with The Darkest Part of the Forest by Holly Black. And this follows brother and sister Hazel and Ben, though it is leaning more towards Hazel. Hazel and Ben live on the outside of a dark forest, and in the dark forest there is a guy who lives in a glass coffin, and he's a fairy, and the coffin gets shattered and he disappears, and chaos ensues. And I recommend this one on multiple reasons. One, the writing is beautiful. Two, fairies. I haven't read a lot of fairy books, but the fairy elements in this book are just so well done. And three, talk about representation, people. This book, right here. Moving on to another traditional YA. This is one that I feel a lot of people are going to recommend, but there's a good reason for that, and that is the Throne of Glass series by Miss Sarah J. Maas. This follows Selena, who is a badass assassin, and she basically competes in a tournament on behalf of the prince to become the king's assassin, but it's the king's champion. And it gets very, very different from there. As fantasy stories go, I don't think, like, from where this starts to where we are in Queen of Shadows, there is so much development, so much character growth, and just generally so much, like, fantastical things happening, especially in Aerofire and Queen of Shadows. So looking at the first one especially, and aren't thinking of the particularly heavy fantasy elements, just wait until you get to the next few, because it's going to go up from there. Next up, we'll go with the one that I also think is getting probably quite a few recommendations, and that is the Mortal Instruments by Cassandra Clare, and indeed, the entire Shadowhunter Chronicles. I think Cassandra Clare's world that she has created is phenomenal. It is so well done. It just has everything. It has magic, it has angels, it has demons, it has vampires, it has werewolves. And the writing is beautiful, and it's just perfect. Like, the plot for the Mortal Instruments follows Clary, who is thrust into this shadow world because her mother is kidnapped. And it's just so good. So good. Moving on to our final traditional YA fantasy, I have An Ember in the Ashes by Sabata here. This follows, like, a revolution kind of movement in an empire that is kind of based off the Roman Empire, but the fantastical elements are very small. They're weaving their way in, but it's the characters in this book that I love. The characters, for the most part, are so fun, and there is so much, like, deception, and it's just really complex, and it's getting a sequel this year, so if there's a time to read it, I would be reading it soon, because you want to get this before the sequel comes out. Then we'll have our final YA urban fantasy, and this one might shock some people, because I have openly spoken about my dislike for this book, but the sequel, blow my mind. So, I will be recommending the Half-Bad trilogy by Sally Green. The Half-Bad trilogy is the story of Nathan, who is half Black Witch, half White Witch, and the Black Witches are evil, the White Witches are good, so it's kind of got a racial background kind of theme. But he is a half-code, and there's, like, a bit of uncertainty about what the White Witches are going to do with him, and it gets really tough. But I will say that I'm going to give this book another shot, because I did not enjoy Half-Bad. So you must be thinking, why are you recommending it then? But the character development in Half-Wild, the second book, just made up for everything. It was just phenomenal, and the second book really begins to incorporate the magical elements more. So that was brilliant. And another one, #diversity. This trilogy. The last book comes out in March, so like An Ember in the Ashes, if you want to get on this, you need to get on it now, because the last book's coming out. Now, I only have 3 recommendations for adult fantasy, because, well, I do have a host of adult fantasy over here. I haven't read them yet, and so I'm not going to recommend them. The first one I'm going to be recommending is one that I think a lot of people will have heard of, etc., and that is The Song of Ice and Fire by George R.R. Martin. The plot for this is too complicated to explain, so I'm not going to explain it. I'm just going to say, if you like political and religious themes, I would go for this. Don't go into it thinking, oh, it's going to be so magical, because this is definitely a low fantasy. The magic elements are very slowly being woven in, and dragons is all I'm going to say. But as a series, it's very good. It's very slow paced, so do be, like, prepared for that. But it's a really strong read, and I really, really enjoyed it. Then we have my penultimate recommendation, which is one that some people are probably going to be able to guess, and that is Elantris by Brandon Sanderson, because this book, oh, it's so good. Like, Game of Thrones does religious and political well. This does it perfectly. It's just so good. It follows a group of protagonists, but the main protagonist is Raoden, and he becomes an Elantrian. They have a process where they become Elantrians, and Elantris is this, like, city that used to be beautiful, but it's decaying now. Something has happened. The magic is dying, and this is like the tale of Elantris becoming beautiful again. and there is so much more to it than that, and it's just perfect. It is getting sequels, so there's that to look forward to. That's not for a few years, so at the moment you can read this as a standalone, and it is excellent. So, Elantris. And the last book I'm going to be recommending is a bit of a strange one because I haven't actually finished it yet, but I am 400 out of 600 pages, so I think I could recommend this now, and even if the ending is crap, I'd probably still give it 5 stars because that's just how wonderful this book is. And that is the Mistborn trilogy by Brandon Sanderson. This is the Final Empire, the first book, and oh my god, this book. The fantasy elements in this book is just... It follows a group of people who are basically going to try and kill the Dark Ruler because the Dark Ruler is evil and he's in charge, and they have all this magical abilities called allomancy, where they burn metals, which is probably something that a lot of people have heard about, but there is so much more to it than that, and the political, especially the politics in this, the political aspect is stunning, but also the criminal, underworld, really well developed. This is honestly one of the best fantasy writers I've ever read, and I've only read 2.5 books by him, so just read Brandon Sanderson, people. He is magnificent. So, that is my monthly recommendations. I hope you enjoyed this video. I will have another one up soon, so, good. Bye.